Welcome to the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast, brought to you by the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association. Here, we dive into the heart of Arkansas's cattle industry, where legislation, education, advocacy, and development come together to support the hardworking cattle producers of the natural state. Whether you're in the pasture or on the road, this is your connection to the people, policies, and programs shaping the future of our industry. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michelle Buffkin-Horton.
And I'm your other co-host, Norley Townsend.
You're going to see something, maybe I say a little different. It's really not. We've done it before. We're going to keep doing it again. Where I'm going to do a brief introduction, update of what's happening at the federal government level, and then along with the state government level, and then Norley will hop into an interview with a subject matter expert. And so we'll have what feels like kind of two segments, but really just a whole podcast covering a couple of different topics. So this week, last week, technically, I guess, by the time that this airs, so it'll be last week, you may have seen that the government shutdown ended. It was the longest government shutdown in the history of the United States. And so that was ended by the Senate finally passing a resolution to fund the government through January 30th of 2026, which is, let's be honest, not that far away. So it's only a few months, but it's a Band-Aid. It gets us across the finish line. Since the Senate passed that and they made changes to the one the House passed, because the House just passed a clean CR, continuing resolution, keeping everything exactly the same, the Senate made some changes. And so that bill then had to go back to the House. And so you saw a lot of people, you may have seen a lot of people saying, oh, the Senate passed it, it's done. Like, no, then the House had to meet and vote on it. The issue, the slowdown there was the fact that most of the representatives were not in D.C. because they'd been closed since the government, they had not been voting on items since the government shut down. And so they were still working, they just weren't sitting there in D.C. voting, they were out in the countryside visiting with their constituents. And so they had to get back to D.C., which with a government shutdown is a little harder than it sounds, with TSA and FAA requirements and everything else. It was a little delayed, a little interesting. Took a couple of days. The House passed the same bill the Senate did, and then President Trump signed it later on that evening. And so as of Thursday, a week or so ago, the government shutdown officially ended. So what does it mean? Essentially, like I said, it's going to fund the government through January 30th of 2026 at fiscal year 25 levels, so most things stay the same. Through January 30th, 2026, obviously if nothing happens before January 30th, 2026, we're going to have to do this crap again. And so we will be doing the exact same thing, looking at appropriations bills. The three things the Senate did amend to the original resolution from the House was that they did include 3 full-year fiscal year 26 appropriations bills. One of those was the agriculture FDA, and so we're very excited about that. It keeps the agricultural rural development FDA and related agencies bill that one passed unanimously out of the appropriations committee and then passed down on the floor as well. And so it provides $26.65 billion in total funding with key investments in nutrition, rural development, and ag research. So what does that mean? It's going to continue funding a lot of the things that have already been funded. Instead of just saying, hey, it's going to stay here, we're going to actually make sure there is money available for the programs. So the National Institute of Food and Agriculture for NEFA grants for Agricultural Research Service is getting some of that money. And then big pieces of that is it includes targeted funding for high-priority research projects while cutting funding for climate hubs, climate smart grants. And so still staying on track with this administration's agenda, but making sure that there are grants available for our researchers and our people across the board. APHIS, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, will be receiving $1.2 billion as requested by the administration. $325 billion worth of livestock, poultry, field crop, and specialty crop production. And so to help protect more than $325 billion. So we're excited about that. One of the big wins for cattle producers, especially in Arkansas, in there was the fact that that does include additional funding for EID tags. And so you may know, mandatory EID tag, well, I say that mandatory loosely, EID tags are required for certain animals. So if they're over 18 months of age, if they are sexually intact and they are crossing state lines, then a EID tag is required. All of those are available at no cost through the Department of Agriculture. This allows the Department of Agriculture to receive those tags continued at no cost. And so very excited to see that money continue. We weren't sure exactly where it was going to sit or where it was going to come out of. So we'll see that money. And then ag marketing services as well, receiving some money for agricultural products. And so continuing the cattle contract library and funding for some other pieces in there. FSA is going to continue getting funding, including funding to support $10 billion worth of farm loans to ensure that our producers have access to necessary capital. And it continues the prohibition on FSA county office closures. And so it continues the FSA functioning at the same level, but adds additional funding for farmers by that term, by that definition, even though we use the term in Arkansas, farmers for cattle producers. I'm envisioning more than likely for row crop producers to come through this emergency funding program. And then also provides conservation funding to the National Research Conservation Services. So a lot of the things that end up in the Farm Bill, end up in the Appropriations Bill, are not only funded at the same level, but some of them have received some additional funding for, or within this Appropriations Bill, within this bill that continued the government functioning. The other piece of it is that there was a 1-year Farm Bill extension in this bill, and so the Farm Bill technically expired in October, and I say the Farm Bill technically expired in October. It's a 2018 Farm Bill. And so it is a CR on a CR on a CR on a CR. It's just continuing to do a continuing resolution. And so this is another continuing resolution on the Farm Bill. But a lot of the issues that were in the Farm Bill were addressed in the One Big Beautiful Bill. So we're excited, again, not necessarily to see that stagnate, but to see some growth and some progress in those issues. And so with that, lots of changes, but also the grand scheme of things, very few changes. Within the agriculture sector, it is nice to see agriculture being included as one of the appropriations in that was actually adjusted. And so good to see that focus from the administration. And so with that, we've got, government shutdown is over. Government has restarted. We'll see how that continues when we go into 2026. And so on the state front, the candidacy filing deadline has ended. So anybody that is was interested in running for Arkansas State Senate, for Arkansas State House of Representatives, for judge, whatever it may be, any of those pieces are going to be closed. And so if you want to see who is running in your area and who you need to get to know, that's all available to you now online on the Secretary of State's website. And so you can see who's filed in your district to serve you or to run and for you. And so we'll have elections in the beginning of March for primaries. And so you'll see a lot of that go through. And so keep an eye out, keep involved, keep looking at it, because it does make a difference who is running and who's elected within your area, your district. So with that, that's our quick and dirty government update. It's been a wild time. You can imagine and you've seen all the social media posts about the about beef imports, about investigating the packers, investigating the Big Four. You've seen social media posts about all kinds of different things from this administration feels like one pendulum into the other. But it is nice to see that agriculture within the congressional level is still very well protected and still very well thought and fought for there. So we're grateful for our congressional delegation. We know that it takes a lot to get an appropriations bill passed, especially in the government shutdown era. And so we're grateful for the work that they've done and been able to work on it there. As far as the investigation into the packers, I will touch on that very briefly, because I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't. And so you may or may not have seen President Trump tweeted, I don't know, the days all run together, tweeted recently, or put on X or whatever you want to call it, Truth Social, I don't know, whichever one he uses, that the that he was asking for the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to do an investigation into the packers, into the big four on price fixing. And so I will I will remind you in case you didn't know, or in case you did know, or I will let you know, in case you were unaware, back in 2020, which seems like forever ago, the ACA actually joined forces with fellow state associations to ask for a formal investigation into the meatpacking industry following, we had 22 cattle groups sign a joint letter to then U.S. Attorney General William Barr, urging the Department of Justice to examine potential anti-competitive or fraudulent activity within the beef supply chain. This call came from the fact that we had two different black swan, if you're watching online you'll see my air quotes, but black swan events. We had COVID-19 pandemic obviously happening, but we also had a fire at the Tyson plant in Holcomb, and so those two things drastically influenced the market and sent cattle producers into chaos, and so or sent the markets into chaos and sent cattle producers carrying that burden. And so we asked for that investigation. We saw very little come of it. You saw settlements come out of it. I will remind you, I'm not a lawyer. A settlement is not necessarily an admission of guilt. It is just a settlement. It is just a payment to not have to go to court and not have to talk about it in public. And so while there may be implications there, not an admission of guilt. And so President Trump has called for the investigation. We support that effort. We're appreciative of the fact that he is now joining forces of saying, hey, like, maybe something's happening here. We should look at it. But I will say, like, regardless of the outcome, bringing the facts to light can help restore trust and confidence in the cattle markets. And so we're grateful for him taking that initiative and are happy to help any way that we can on that front. And so with that, that's all the updates I have for you. Now we're going to talk about grass.
Yeah.
Forages.
Yep. Forages with Dr. Jonathan Kubesch. So stay tuned.
Thank y'all so much. We'll see you after this interview.
Hey, y'all, and welcome back to the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast. I'm your host, Norley Townsend, and I have a special guest with me today, Dr. Jonathan Kubesch. So, Dr. Kubesch, for those who don't know you yet, please introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Well, you've already got the name, but in terms of the background, I am the State Forage Extension Specialist, and so everything between that black stuff on the ground and the cow's mouth is my responsibility. I'm a bit of an agronomist, which means that I'm trying to grow a plant for an intended goal. In our case, we're trying to put this grass through a cow and make the most benefit out of it. And in addition to that role, I look a little bit about different ways that we can present that to the animal, whether by grazing, making hay, baleage, and a few other opportunities we can use for like biofuels and stuff. But we're here to feed the cows, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so right now we're in between fall and winter, even though it's like 70 degrees outside today. What have you been seeing or hearing from producers this year when it comes to forage challenges as we head into fall and winter?
Well, the big thing that we have here in Arkansas is this fall forage gap. And it's this weird thing where because we're in the transition zone, we can grow cool season grasses like fescue, we can grow warm season grasses like Bermuda or Bahia. We can grow it all poorly. And so in this fall period, it's warm enough where we should be able to grow something. Our fescue has just got through a really hot summer. It's really hard to get a lot of growth off of it as we get into the fall period, especially when we get these repeated dry falls, droughts. But at the same time, it's so cold for our warm season grasses, we aren't really getting enough growth off of them. And so instead of having this cool season relief that we might see if you went up into Missouri or Kentucky, we've got this slump at the end of the season. And it's a really hard pivot because the weather's too nice for us to not have something green out there to support the animal. It feels really early to start feeding hay. And so from a management perspective, it can be really hard to think, man, on top of having to feed in the cold winter, I've got to come and deal with this in the dry fall.
Yeah, so when we think about getting pastures ready for the cooler months, where should producers even start, and what should they be looking at right now?
Well, a wiser guy than I said we need to plan at least a season ahead. or at least 30 days ahead. And really, a lot of our fall grazing opportunities start somewhere in August, whether we're going to be looking at fall stockpiling, which we can talk a little bit about later, or maybe planting an annual for a targeted grazing right at this juncture between fall and winter. A lot of this really comes down to having this plan somewhere around Labor Day for a lot of our stuff to have something in the ground, set aside, a gate closed, and it's this real big hinge point in our growing season. Grass stops getting really easy to grow. We need to be a little bit more precise with how we allocate that out to the animals, and we really need to figure out a way or a plan for what we need and when we need it for the rest of the season.
Yeah. So I know soil testing is something Extension talks about a lot. And why is it especially important this time of year, and what trends are you seeing in those results?
Well, I'll say that a soil test is a lot better than a guess. And the big thing that we're trying to do with soil testing is figure out what nutrients are limiting, what can we provide to maybe increase the productivity of the pasture or the hay meadow, and what are the things that might make the most sense to put out. Our routine soil test is going to give you some of those general minerals, and our big things are going to be phosphorus, potassium. We're going to get the pH level of the soil, which determines how available all these nutrients are. And a lot of times people will want to look at organic matter because that deals with how we hold water. And there's some really interesting work that's starting to come out about how that might influence how nitrogen moves through the soil. And nitrogen is the big thing that helps plants grow. The big thing that I see in Arkansas is that those low fertility problems are very unique on a lot of the farms that I visit. And so it's not that we're just universally low in phosphorus, potassium, maybe we're not putting out as much nitrogen as we should, but on a farm by farm basis, we've just got a lot of unique ways that we come up short. From my perspective, if you're looking to make an investment on pasture ground, maybe we look at putting out some lime. But, if we're looking at trying to correct some of these deficiencies in the soil test gives us a starting point, and it's a lot more cost effective than just putting out triple 19.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit here. So let's talk about cool season annuals. What are the workhorses for Arkansas producers, and how do you recommend folks approach planting season?
All right, so our cool season annuals, a lot of times these are going to be our safest bets if we're going to try and do a planting around Labor Day, or if you're more traditional and you're just wanting spring grazing, you plant these sometime before mid-October. And so, number one thing, my entry-level cool season annual, my personal favorite, what I put out at the house is going to be an annual ryegrass. If you're in North Arkansas, you might look for something that's a little bit more cold hardy, like Marshall. If you're in South Arkansas, you might be using something like Nelson that's a tetraploid. But annual ryegrass is kind of a throw and grow grass. It's a really fun demonstration for kids in a grass class where you sprinkle ryegrass on top of cinder block, you water it, and it grows. And for a lot of our folks who are just throwing seed on top of the ground, maybe rubbing it in with a chain harrow, really easy throw and grow option. And for a lot of our objectives, it seems to meet that early spring growth. Now, if you're looking at some of our other options, we switch over to things like the small grains. And depending on when you want to use them is what I'm going to pull out of my toolbox. So if we want to go with a winter wheat or a cereal rye, we plant those now, we let them grow through the winter, we use them up in spring, and we'll probably have them done sometime around May and have exhausted them. When I think about small grains, it's more of a one-time grazing event. When I think about ryegrass, I might get 2 to 3. The other option that you have, and this is a little bit more niche, is going to be planting spring oats in the fall. You heard that right, spring oats in the fall. And the reason we do that is they're not going to make it through the winter. We don't want them to have to need that signal going through cold vernalization. It gets too cold. It gets cold, tells them I need to grow and pick up fast. And so they just grow, they do their thing. We graze them out in December. It gets cold, they're done. If you plant a winter oat, it may or may not make it through the winter, but in the spring, it'll get that cold signal. It goes up, it gets done. But, spring oats are going to be a lot better fit because you want these targeted grazing events in the fall. A big question that comes up a lot is mixtures, because ryegrass plus a small grain is a really good option. If we talk about where we plant our ryegrass and our small grain mixtures, a lot of that's done in South Arkansas. You go towards Hope, you're going to see winter wheat or cereal rye plus ryegrass. If you go down towards Monticello, especially at UAM, they've got a really good program where they put an oat out with a ryegrass. One planting event, and then they graze the oats out, let the ryegrass come up later, and you can kind of, for the price of one pass over the field, get 2 or 3 grazing events.
Yeah. And so for the producers trying to balance those annuals with existing pre-annuals, any tips on finding that sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of building a whole farm system, the further south you go in the state, we're really going to want to put like a quarter of the farm into some kind of winter annual program. We're going to want to stockpile a quarter, and then the other half is where we're going to either be feeding hay or grazing between August and December. And so we try to stagger this out in the field. I know that nobody's got a perfectly square farm where they cut these little pie slices out, but a field here or a field there where it just makes sense to put these on. If I was to make a suggestion, a lot of these winter annuals might be really good where you've got a lot of winter annual weed pressure, because ryegrass and some of these small grains are very competitive with those weeds. So you can use it as almost a bit of a weed control program to put these on top of those weedy fields.
Yeah, for sure. And so, switching gears a little bit again, stockpiling is a big topic every year for someone who's trying to do it right. What are the keys to making stockpiled forage actually last?
Well, when you deal with a stockpile forage, and for those of you at home, we're talking about basically closing a few gates and letting a stand grow up and let the cows kind of harvest it as almost a last cut of hay. The big thing comes with starting on time, giving it the fertility that it needs, and contrary to every other thing I would ever talk about, taking it to the ground. So with a stockpile forage, sometime in early August for our warm seasons, or late August, early September for our cool seasons, we're going to come in and graze it really low, like 2 to 3 inches tall. Scalp the sucker. Right after that, we're going to follow up with about 50 units of nitrogen, and then we're going to leave it alone somewhere between 60 75 days. And so for our warm season stuff, we want to use it between mid-October, mid-November. For our cool season stuff, we're starting around Thanksgiving, and we can go almost to February when it starts greening back up. Fescue can be a dirty word in Arkansas, but those winter months are really where this stockpiling justifies having any acreage in it. The big thing about starting off right is just making sure that we have that fertility, and we're not trying to carry any of the dead stuff from in the season into that off season. So we graze it really low to remove all of the junk, clean it up, and so all the stuff that the animal's going to bite is fresh stuff that grew sometime since August. And that really ups the quality on it and helps us carry the animal with as little supplementation as possible.
Yeah. And so you always hear producers say, ooh, we're too late, I missed the window. Is stockpiling even worth it then?
Well, at some point we go from calling it a stockpile to calling it kind of an end of season stretch. And that's okay. I mean, anything that we can do to try and provide as much grazing as far into this fall winter period as possible is really what's going to save us in terms of trying to minimize the amount of feed hay, supplementation, that sort of thing. And we actually did a really nice demonstration up in Faulkner County last year. Enola, thank you, Jeff, for having us out. But we did about a month late of a stockpile initiation, and we still got about a third of what we would if we had just followed our full recipe. And so closing a few gates and trying to move the herd around as a consistent unit instead of, a lot of folks get to the end of the season, we start leaving gates open and we let the animal try and scrounge and scavenge what she can. It can work, and it's a good way to, if we're talking about 1,000 pounds of grass, a little bit north of a round bale that we're leaving on each acre out there, I mean, that's one less round bale we've got to feed. And it's going to be a lot higher quality than what we can go and find and cut.
Yeah. And so once the forage is there, what's your advice on stretching it, like you said, like strip grazing, rotation, anything that makes a big difference in that?
Yeah, I mean, really the only way that we can ration out forage, even if you're feeding a hay bale, is we can give them space or we can give them time. And so when we talk about a simple rotational system, you open the gate, they go in, you close the gate, they take what they will. Depending on how long you let that happen, you might just turn them into a field for a week like you would in the grazing season, and we just call that simple rotational grazing. They come back out. We could talk about strip grazing where we use some temporary fence, give them as much as they're going to eat every 1 to 3 days and just keep allocating out. Or we can talk a little bit about limit grazing for those of you who might not have a lot of temporary fence or might not have the infrastructure. You kick them out, you let them eat it for a few hours or maybe a day on this, then kick them off, day on, kick them off. How do you ration space? How do you ration time? Something that comes up a lot, and I just really want to make sure I cover it, is with strip grazing, we get asked a lot about, do I need a back fence? And the idea about the back fence is once you move them up, you've got to have something behind them. Otherwise, they're going to go back and hit the original spot. And at this time of year where our warm seasons have stopped growing, our cool seasons are slowing down, often it doesn't make sense to have that back fence behind them. We're just going to keep rationing in front. And so for a lot of people using a stockpile, you start by the water source and you keep giving them strips moving away from that water source so they can still go back to water. And that's just one thing that makes it a lot easier to get started and really make the most of it.
And we talked a little bit about feeding hay, and I know a lot of producers are starting to feed hay right now. So what are you seeing in hay tests this year? Anything surprising or concerning?
Well, the wonderful part about hay testing is that we only know as much as the people who submit the samples. True. And so there's a natural bit of a bias towards our hay tests reflecting some of the higher end production in the state. We had a really cool thing going on in the Arkansas River Valley and a little bit down in southeast where we got some abnormally, quotation marks, high hay tests. Part of that seems like they got out to the field a little bit too late for their cool season. They got in a little too early for their warm season, and so they had these tests that tested really high on protein. Energy looked really good, but this hay should be late. It should be a little chunky. But, I mean, the test is the test. In terms of how that's going to affect your feeding is the better that you can get those quality numbers up on a hay test, the less you're going to need to supplement that animal. And so we really like high quality hay in this state. It's not just a filler, it's a feed. In terms of concerns around the state, it's been a little bit, there's been some conversations about nitrates, especially where you go up north and east where they've been in a D2 drought for a while. But that's more of in the grazing situation than it's been in hay. The only other thing that I would talk about would be outside of the hay test numbers was ergot on Dallas grass, and so Dallas grass staggers. We had a few issues more on the grazing side than in hay. And to kind of quickly walk through that, Dallas grass staggers is the result of the animal going and eating seed heads infected with a fungus. And so they stagger, they might have some respiratory problems, and then they might keel over and die. And it's more of an issue where they get their choice of the plant out in a grazing setting. Seed heads at the top, that's where the mouth goes first, as opposed to if you're feeding in a hay ring. And so I did a few farm visits where we had to figure out how much was out there, what was the relative risk. We generally don't worry about it in hay the same way we do in grazing because they're not being as selective in a hay ring as they are out in the field. And ideally, there's so much grass under that seed head that we're diluting that out.
Yeah. So there's often a pretty big gap between hay quality and nutritional needs of cows in the winter. What are some practical ways producers can bridge the gap without breaking the bank?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we want to do is take that hay test like we were talking about earlier, and we have a tool called the Hay Quality Calculator on the Arkansas Forage Advisor. And what you do is just put in your hay test numbers, the crude protein, the TDN. Crucially, put it in on the dry matter basis, not as received when you see on the test. And that will tell you whether it's going to be sufficient or insufficient for all kinds of different animals. So all the way from a 1,000-pound cow to a 1,400-pound cow, and every stage of production, dry, gestating, lactating. We also have that for stockers, folks who might have sheep and goats and horses as well. And it'll just tell you where you're coming up short and where you're doing just fine. The big part that we go from there is developing an appropriate supplementation program. When you talk about breaking the bank, I think about working with a nutritionist to do a least cost ration. So what's the most affordable way to take a byproduct or some kind of other supplemental feed, cut that in with my hay to make sure that I'm making an appropriate ration for this class of livestock.
Yeah. And so what about, kind of touching on this, so what about alternative feeds or byproducts that are are there certain ones that make more sense this year based on availability or price?
I think the best byproduct is really going to depend on your region. It's one of the best parts about Arkansas is that we have enough row crop ground and our commodity market is really favorable to open up a lot of things when you talk about stuff derived from corn or beans. And that's really where I'm going to focus because those are where I think about protein and energy. There has been a lot of interest in rice straw, and that comes up a lot once you get more in a drought situation, but based on some work out of Louisiana, a big thing that we see with rice straw and some of those byproducts out of the rice industry is that we're not necessarily going to meet those protein or energy requirements. Now, if we're cutting those in with a really high-quality cool season annual, as like a filler or a bulk, we're almost we're trying to stretch our high-quality stuff with some low quality. But most of the time when we're talking about trying to complement hay, we're looking at a corn or a soybean product to go with that. Some things that I kind of wrote down to keep track of is things like corn gluten, soy hulls, dried distillers grains. Sometimes you see tubs and cubes if you've still got an adequate forage supply for them to graze on. And then a lot of these 3 to 4 way commodity blends. Depending on what you need to supplement, more often we're worried about energy or total digestible nutrients is kind of the shorthand, as opposed to trying to match protein on these animals. And so when I'm looking at it, I'm working with the nutritionist. A lot of times we're going to be more limited on energy than we're going to be on protein.
Yeah. So are there any red flags or common mistakes when using byproducts in winter feeding programs?
In terms of the biggest red flag, I think trying to come up with a feeding program that doesn't have a baseline of what we're trying to supplement is going to be the biggest issue. It's great if we have the handling facilities, we know how to safely store these things, we're able to do the inventory management, FIFO, first in, first out. We're not letting rodents in the shed to go park on these feeds. All these kind of common sense things. But the biggest issue that I run into is that we're doing this without any kind of idea of what we're trying to fix in the system. And oftentimes, if you're feeding hay out in a pasture setting, and if you're like most of Arkansas where we've got a mixed warm season, cool season grass pasture, sometimes they're grazing in addition to eating on that hay bale. And I'm not saying that it's going to be a majority of their diet, but there's enough bites out there where maybe our ration is not necessarily reflecting what the animal is doing. And so she may be artificially increasing the quality of her diet. But my biggest thing is without that hay test baseline, we're feeding on guesses.
Yeah, so get your hay tested.
Yes.
So looking ahead, what should producers start thinking about pasture innovation, and what can they be doing now to set up a successful spring?
When we talk about trying to set up a pasture renovation, I think the big thing is that autopsy of why are we renovating? And, it's kind of the same thing that insurance will do when we get in a car wreck. How the heck did you end up in this? And this is really where it's important to keep good grazing records or just a good pictures of the farm over time. And a lot of times it's things that are more often our fault than they are the environment. Another wise person said that drought doesn't kill good pastures, but it does kill the mismanaged ones pretty easily. We could talk about things like we've been grazing too low, we've been coming back too frequently. One of my big things is that despite the fact we've put a whole bunch of fertility into this ground, we've put a whole bunch of weed control, why is it covered in sage grass? And oftentimes it's grazing at the inappropriate times across the season, and maybe we're not trying to favor a specific thing. Oftentimes we have to change something in our management before we're going to make sense of this. Now, when it comes to renovation, it's a whole spectrum between we just change maybe our fertility program, maybe we're changing how we're making our grazing throughout the season, but sometimes it does come down to having to start over. And the big thing that we recommend is something called spray, smother, spray. And this is a chemical and cultural weed control program to make sure that when we kill out whatever's keeping the weeds in the seed bank, they don't all just flush out and kill whatever we try to plant. Mississippi State says we put about $400 an acre into doing a good job planting a new acre of pasture. And it's $400 I'd really like to make sure it makes some dividends. And so this spray, smother, spray, it just allows us to get control over that. So to kind of break it down, spray, 2 quarts of 41% glyphosate with a surfactant applied over the field. We want to smoke the sucker dead, kill out what's there. And then we come in and we plant some sort of smother crop that's seasonally appropriate. This time of year, and at this edge of the window, we're probably planting something like winter oat or a winter wheat. We want something to hold the ground in place. We want it to fight the weeds off. And then we're going to come back in spring. We're hopefully going to get a grazing out of it. If we're really lucky, maybe we get 2. Once we've grazed it out sometime in March or April, another 2 quarts, smoke the sucker dead, kill out our smother, and then we plant whatever we wanted to. And so in the spring, we've got this window kind of edge of April into May where we're planting our Bermuda grass, our Bahia grass. We might be sprigging, we might be seeding on that Bermuda. But that's a really quick system. And that's what we did down at the Hope Station, where we put in a ryegrass trial. So we took a year off and did sorghum sudan spray, winter oat spray, bahia spray. But there's still time to do one cycle, come in, plant a warm season perennial grass. For fescue country, what you're going to do is just switch this over, do your burn down 2 quarts sometime in that April-May window, plant your sorghum sudan grass, pearl millet, some kind of summer annual. Those are just going to be the easiest to control when you're done with them. Come back in, 2 quarts, plant your fescue between September and October. And so when you're getting ready for spring, my big suggestion would be, where are we going to feed hay? Mark those spots out on the farm. Which fields do I want to feed on? The ones that I'm going to need to fix the quickest. Mm-hmm. And so you feed on the weakest fields, or you pick a sacrifice lot. Ideally pick a few, because the cows are going to get in the mud. We'll really get worried about the quality of life for the cow, maybe some animal health concerns if we let them sit there, especially if we're trying to deal with fall calving cows and get those calves up off the ground in the dry. So designate a few sacrifice lots and have a plan to clean those up at the end of the season. Spring is a great time because we get really ambitious. And so the big thing that I would kind of caution is, in spring, the only things we can plant are going to be things like Bermuda, bahia, and improved crabgrass if we're trying to do something like that, sorghum sudan grass, all of our warm season options. And then our cool season options, it's really between Labor Day and Halloween that we need to be thinking about putting those out in this state.
Yeah. And so you work with a lot of producers across the state. What is the most resilient forage system? What do the most resilient forage systems have in common?
Well, the most resilient forage systems have really good managers, and that's probably been the most shocking thing in my education. 10 years of school to learn how to grow grass well, and you come out and you see people on stands that should not work, things that should not work, but they know how to manage them well. And so that looks like we've been kind of hitting it over the head. Hay testing, they know what's in their fields and when. They know where the animals are going next. And as we talk about going into fall and winter, they know what they're going to feed, when they're going to feed, and they have plan A, B, and C about if this comes up short, if that doesn't work. If, like this week, we get somewhere between 1/10 and half an inch of rain in places, and we can't just let the animals out on these spots because they might sink into the mud like they do at my house. What are we going to do next? And some of that foresight is really the big thing that we need to talk about when we get into fall and winter, because a lot of times we just kind of stumble into it. Well, I better make sure I have a hay plan. We put up the hay months ago. What do I do with that? We talk about missing these windows on planting some of these cool season annuals. Is there still time to pivot? Mm-hmm. Prices were just so good. I took the number of head down. Do I still need to invest in this? Do I still need to work on that? Pretty much if you can make some of that time, like an hour a day, to just think about what's next. That's kind of where the operation is going to benefit the most. And it doesn't have to be a full hour. It could just be that while you're choring, looking out, taking stock of where things are.
And so for anyone needing more help, what resources does Extension offer you wish more producers took advantage of?
I think the biggest thing I wish folks took more advantage of is that relationship with the county agent. It's their job to help you, and more often than not, they're the folks between you and dealing with specialists like me who have the real lay of the land. Hey, I know a guy who's selling good quality hay, because they take all the hay tests. Mm-hmm. Hey, I know where you can get seed for this. The specialist says that this variety is the bee's knees, but here's something I've seen that works on farms in this portion of the state. And then a lot of times they know our website and our systems better, where, hey, I think you should read this material, like our FSA 3133, Grazing Stockpiled Forages for Feeding in Fall and Winter. Unless you know that magic number, it's really hard to pull from our website sometimes. Mm-hmm. But a county agent can say, here is the canon of extension literature that you as a farmer should have on hand. And the biggest thing is just being able to make those minor tweaks when we get into a hiccup or we have a situation. I've ruined this hay feeding area. What's the next best spot to move the animals on? And helping you scout and make some of those decisions.
Yeah. And so before we wrap up, could you tell Arkansas producers one thing they should focus on right now to make winter easier?
I think the number one thing that Arkansas producers should focus on right now is just having an inventory of what we're going to feed and when we're going to feed it. Just something that can be on a tablecloth, a napkin. Don't scratch on your tablecloth, folks. But have something on the back of a napkin, back of an envelope, or even just maybe even a little bit of an Excel spreadsheet. This many bales are in the barn. I can get these commodities in this way. I can handle this much gin trash. I can handle this much corn gluten feed. Here's how I'm going to feed it out and when. I've got this much pasture left. I'm going to let them into these fields for the remainder of the year, and just start laying out what's the next step. I think one of the big challenges when it comes with making that inventory is it sounds scary. Again, talk to the county agent. They'll sit down with you and kind of line out, here's what we can do here, here, here. But just knowing what we have is going to be a big first step.
Yeah. Have a plan.
Yes.
Create a plan. Yeah, so that's all my questions that I had for you. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I really do appreciate getting to be on Arkansas Cattle Business. One of the big things that I really do appreciate about this state is we've got a really invested community of producers, industry professionals, public agencies that are all committed towards the cattle industry, and happy to do my part to make sure that we're making that pasture do what our animal needs it to. So
yeah,
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So that's it on the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast. Thank you again for being on, and I'll drop your contact information and everything in our details of the podcast. So thank you so much. See y'all later.
Thank you.
This is the Arkansas Cattle Business Podcast, your trusted source for all things cattle in the natural state.